Welcome to another episode of Rich Politics. I'm so glad you've taken the time to tune in today. We've got lots to talk about, lots to get through. But firstly, let me say thank you to all my new subscribers. And we're growing slowly. It's a small venture, a small thing that I've set up from my home, sharing with you and ranting at you about all things politics, and in particular here in Wales. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I'd love to have you on board so you can get these weekly broadcasts. Well, what a week it's been in politics. The internal market bill has finally gone through to the House of Lords. And Labour have gone into meltdown. That's right, because let's be honest, most of them never really wanted to leave the European Union and still feel the same way. But we are taking back control, and that's what it's all about. In the Senate this week here in Wales, we've seen a few things that have caused concern for a lot of people here in Wales. Firstly, the idea that the elections could be postponed or delayed because of COVID-19. A few months ago, the Health Minister Vaughan Gething spoke to ITV Wales and in a statement said to them, given what is happening with COVID-19 right now, there is a potential or the possibility that we could postpone or delay May's elections next year. Well, that died a death, and of course, it's risen its head again. That's right, politicians down in Cardiff Bay on big fat salaries are going to decide whether or not our democracy should be postponed or delayed. In fact, the First Minister Mark Drakeford was asked a question in the Senate yesterday whether or not he thinks it's a good thing for these elections to be delayed, and this is what he had to say. Check this out.
So May is a very long way away, and none of us are in a position to be able to look into that crystal ball. I share the members' determination that we should vote in May of next year, but I simply put that one point to him, that we want an election in which every Welsh citizen feels that they can go to the polling station and are not put off from doing so because the state of public health at the time might be very off-putting to them. And it's just foolish not to be willing to contemplate that and to think about how we would cope with it were we to be faced by it.
There you go. There's Mark Drakeford. He said a lot more, by the way, but in reality, he's hinted to the fact that we can't rule out delaying or postponing the elections in May next year. Why? Because of COVID-19. However, remember, we were all allowed to pile into pubs. That was okay. And we're allowed to queue up at supermarkets, keep 2 meters apart, get our groceries and go home. So if I can queue up at a supermarket, as one person told me this week, then surely I can queue up to vote. And they are, of course, correct. So I, for one, am hoping the elections go ahead next year because I'll be involved in them and standing in them as well. So I can't wait for them, looking forward to seeing how the Welsh Labour government will do, because I don't think they're going to do as well as they think they are, given the way that they've handled the whole pandemic. But not just the pandemic, let's be quite frank. The NHS in Wales was in a mess pre-pandemic, which the electorate need to know about. 5 out of 7 health boards have been in special measures. They've been paying advisors. Listen to this. An advisor that was living in Marbella in Spain was paid thousands of pounds, thousands and thousands of pounds to advise the Welsh government. That's right. That's what's happening in Wales. That's why the NHS is in a complete mess, because we've got clowns overseeing it and running it in the Welsh government. Which brings me on nicely to talk about devolution. After 2 decades of it here in Wales, we've seen major changes. For example, take the name of the Assembly itself, change into Parliament or Senedd. So it's gone from a National Welsh Assembly to the Senedd or Welsh Parliament. Now, this change came into force earlier this year. We were never consulted. The public weren't asked what they thought. It wasn't, I don't believe, in Welsh Labour's manifesto or any party for that matter. They just legislated for it and changed it. And of course, they legislated to give 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote. And, of course, foreign nationals. None of this was put to the people of Wales. This was pushed through the Welsh government and it is now in law. But what's more concerning is the fact that Assembly members believe they need more politicians down the bay. That's right, more politicians. Although it's costing us over £60 million a year for their current big fat salaries, now they want to extend it by potentially another 30 members, taking it from 60 to 90. Now, you've got to understand something. We're already paying ridiculous amounts of money for these politicians down Cardiff Bay when actually we don't really need them. Let's be honest. The truth is this. the Assembly itself is just a gravy train where people are just on the bandwagon taking as much money as they can and also paying members of their family while they're at it. It's jobs for the boys, as we say. You know, a report last year in June by Will Hayward of Wales Online. In the report, there was a quote from a couple of people actually, but I want to point out one from the Electoral Reform Society. And it was the director called Jess Blair, her name is, for that actual institution. And she said the decision not to take forward planned reforms to the Assembly is a deeply disappointing one that could hold us back from creating a parliament that delivers more effectively for the people of Wales. She goes on to say, the current overstretched Senedd is not fit for purpose. Well, she got that bit right, not fit for purpose. 60 members is not enough for a lawmaking parliament after 20 years into devolution. This is recognised by the majority of Assembly members currently sitting in the Senedd. So she has suggested that a majority of people in the Assembly want more members. They want to increase their numbers. Now, this is something that both Plaid Cymru and Welsh Labour are very keen to do. Of course, this is obviously leading to something, as you can see in a few moments. But before I share any more, for those of you who don't get it, the guys at Centre for Welsh Studies, Matt McKinnon and the team there, have kindly allowed me to use this video to explain to you what is going on here in Wales under devolution. Check this out.
The 21-year-long story of the Senedd can by and large be described as a slow march towards full devolution. As we've covered in previous videos, the original Welsh Assembly of 1999 had about as much power as the Secretary of State for Wales, with the ability to make secondary legislation in specific areas. By 2007, however, Cardiff Bay would resemble something similar to Westminster, with a government and a parliament holding that government to account, and the ability to enact primary legislation through assembly measures. Following another referendum in 2011, the Assembly would go on to gain the power to make primary legislation in its devolved responsibilities, without any input from the UK government. In 2020, the Assembly, now overseeing Brexit negotiations and able to set its own income tax rates, would be rechristened as the Welsh Parliament, truly reflecting the significant changes in the institution since its inception. The story of the Senedd so far tells us much about the direction of travel, and that direction is pointed unremittingly towards complete devolution and essentially independence. As this process has been so protracted, the public at large is still yet to notice what is underway, and would likely be horrified if they did. According to opinion polling in June, only 25% would vote for full independence in a referendum, and the same percentage are in favour of abolishing the Senedd altogether. With backlash against plans for more Assembly members, the Welsh Conservative Party starting to question the machinery of Welsh Government, and the Brexit Party and Abolish Party vying strongly for the anti-devolution vote, it's clear that the very nature of the Senedd will be the main focus of the coming election. Perhaps the one-directional tale of devolution isn't as set in stone as it once seemed.
A huge thank you to Centre for Welsh Studies and of course Matt McKinnon and his team for letting me use that video. It's part of a whole series they've done. You need to check them out. They're all across social media and they'll help you to understand what devolution is here in Wales. So the idea that the Assembly wants more members, it wants more powers. Are we sleepwalking towards independence? It's a good question because, let's be honest, it's financial suicide for the people of Wales with a £14 billion deficit. We've got this idea, this pipe dream, and people think that anybody that's against Welsh independence is anti-Welsh. I'm not anti-Welsh at all. I mean, I'm Welsh. I was born in Llanelli. Come on, man. People are crazy. They call us, the English oppressors, or as if we've betrayed our motherland and country and our flag and all that. It's a load of absolute rubbish. Just because one believes in the union, it doesn't affect my culture, my history, my language, my people. Of course not. We are part of one united kingdom, and that's the way it should stay. But that's just by the way. So they want to increase from 60 members to an additional 30. But let me give you some figures here, because it doesn't make any sense, really. So the increase they're looking to get by 2026 is my understanding. It might be in Welsh Labour's manifesto next year in May at the elections. So in total then, that's 90 Assembly members. And then we've got 40 members of Parliament as well, of course, for a population of just 3 million people. Now, that's very important when you consider London, for example, has an Assembly. And they have 25 Assembly members for 9 million people. Just goes to show that you don't need a larger and costly second tier of politicians here in Wales. But of course, it's all part of a plan, isn't it? Think about it. More powers, more politicians. Where does this journey of devolution taking us? I would suggest it is a call for Welsh independence. Plaid Cymru, of course, being that kind of flag-bearing, Welsh nationalists. Let's get Wales free from the United Kingdom. Let's separate from the Union in that sense. I mean, it's just a pipe dream. It's just crazy. Polling in June, and this is a fact, polling in June showed that 25% of people, if there was a referendum on independence, 25% of people would vote for independence. Guess what? 25% of people also said they'd vote to abolish the Welsh Assembly. Very interesting. So the appetite for abolishing the Assembly is just as strong as there is for Welsh independence. Now, I know Plaid Cymru are coming out with all these flashy reports that they've commissioned more recently and, of course, trying to answer some of the questions like borders, currency and the deficit. But the reality is the maths don't add up. So as the direction of travel seems to be towards Welsh independence, then I wonder what we're going to do about it, because we cannot continue the way we are. I mean, let's be honest, things have got worse in Wales. If you walked on some of the valleys, the town centres around here in the valleys, I mean, the deprivation is ridiculous. And yet we think that somehow the magic to all of this is more politicians. When has it ever been right for more politicians to be the answer? It's not right. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't work. In fact, even our own Senedd, we've got our own John Bercow. Really, we really have. There's the House of Commons has the Speaker of the House. We have the presiding officer. That's right. That would be Elin Jones of Plaid Cymru. And of course, they're not supposed to be biased in any way or show any special treatment to certain members or within the Welsh Parliament. But the reality is they do. There have been so many occasions that I've witnessed and watched plenary, watched what goes on in the chamber, and I've seen bias. And of course, they're bedfellows. Of course, Plaid Cymru and Welsh Labour, they're in it together. So I wonder, will Welsh Labour put this in their manifesto in May next year to extend more members in the Senedd? Will they, won't they? I, for one, am sure that the people of Wales should have the right to decide whether or not we need more politicians. For me, it's a no. For most people in Wales, it's probably going to be the same. It's a no. Because when has more politicians ever been the answer? Costing the Welsh taxpayer millions and millions of pounds. It's time to end this, folks. We've got to stop this nonsense. We've got to stand up to the establishment and let them know we will not allow this to happen. So as well as more politicians, they also want more powers. That's right. All part of the plan, remember, sleepwalking towards Welsh independence. They want more powers. In 2011, we had a referendum here in Wales. The Assembly wanted more powers. I'm calling it an Assembly because we never voted for a Parliament. They wanted more powers devolved to them out of the 20 powers they already have. And of course, this was a coalition coming together of, yes, you guessed, Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru. They, of course, wanted a referendum to get more powers. Another case for sleepwalking towards Welsh independence. But the turnout was poor. They had 35.6% of the people of Wales turn out to vote in this referendum. It wasn't about whether or not we should have independence. It was about more powers to the already devolved administration. Interesting, when you speak to the Welsh nationalists, they'd say, we've had 3 referendums. You should respect the referendums. I respect every referendum, as I expect many of you would respect the referendum when we voted to leave the EU, of course. But now that we've been under devolution for 2 decades, I think it's time for another referendum, which are not binding, of course, as you kindly point out to me constantly. So let's have another one on devolution, on abolition. Should we abolish the Welsh Assembly? Should we keep it the same, or should we have Welsh independence? Grow a set of gohunads and come on out of the cupboard and say, yeah, let's do this then. Let's have a campaign next year in May, stand on manifestos where we want a referendum to give the people of Wales a choice. Be brave enough. Let's see what the people want. It seems to me the more powers that the Assembly gets, remember it's not a parliament, the Assembly gets, the worse things get for the people of Wales. Our NHS is in crisis. We've got the longest waiting times with more cancelled operations and appointments. We've got 5 of the 7 health boards in special measures, which I mentioned earlier in the broadcast. And of course, our education. A report was done back in December by the BBC, and it stated this: Wales school system has been ranked the worst in the UK for the 5th time running in the international PISA test published in December. So we were even ranking the worst in the whole of the UK in maths, science and English, important subjects. Yet under this devolved administration, we're seeing things get slowly worse. And how can it be that MSs, which is members of the Senedd, or Assembly members, whatever you choose to call them, they want to see broadcasting devolve. That's right, as if we didn't have enough Welsh nationalists already working within our media here in Wales, which I've experienced, witnessed firsthand. In fact, someone put a tweet out a couple of weeks ago attacking the Abolish the Assembly Party, and it was liked by BBC Wales News. That's right, and they apologised, and then of course they took it down. So we can see the infiltration even within Welsh media. And so platforms like this, where I get to rant and share with you, might give you a different insight into what's going on in Wales, because what you get from the mainstream media is not always the reality or the truth. Worst of all is giving the Welsh Assembly tax-raising powers. Of course, we're going to see an increase in income tax if they're in charge of the whole thing. They promise not to raise income taxes, but I can guarantee you it's going to happen. Another example of why more powers is not good for the people of Wales. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's rant, today's broadcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And I hope to catch you next week on Rich Politics.